The PS Vita was a console, anyone remember it? It was the successor to the super popular PSP, and brought almost console-level graphics to the portable world. That might not sound super impressive nowadays with the Nintendo Switch being in the hands of millions, but back in 2011 when this was released, I would say the Vita was way ahead of its time. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're taking a look at the PlayStation Vita 8 years later. When I say 8 years later, I mean 8 years later to the day. The PS Vita was released on December 17th, 2011, at least in Japan, and would later release to North America and Europe and so on February 22nd, 2012. Most would consider the Vita a failed console, but this isn't because of the hardware. I would even go as far as to say the Vita never really failed, but Sony failed the Vita. It was actually a very capable machine. The biggest problem is that there were hardly any AAA titles for it, at least after the first couple years. The game library for the Vita is actually quite massive, but that's thanks to numerous remakes, old PSP games, and lots of indie games, which are great and have their place, but people look for AAA games. That's the reason they buy consoles, at least generally speaking. There were some great AAA games, mind you, but not a lot. You had Killzone Mercenary, you had Uncharted Golden Abyss, which I would say is possibly the best looking game on the PS Vita, at least in terms of graphical power. There was a Call of Duty game, Borderlands 2, and Assassin's Creed, Need for Speed Most Wanted. These are just a few games, and they were all pretty good for the most part, and in the very least impressive for a 2012 portable. Sony didn't put in enough effort to make sure developers kept developing for the Vita, and that's where problems started to arise. It didn't make sense for the devs to want to do it on their own, because frankly the Vita never really was selling that well, besides when it first launched, and so why would you dump so much money into a system that wouldn't get you very good sales? Games for the Vita fizzled out really quickly, and that's why problems started. As a result, Sony basically started ignoring the console before stopping making games in 2015 and ending manufacturing altogether in early 2019. The Vita was being made for 7 years, and that might sound like a real long time, but for almost all of that, the Vita felt like the black sheep of the Sony family. It's kind of funny because in 2015, Sony blamed mobile gaming as part of the reason the Vita wasn't doing well, and while admittedly I'm sure that wasn't helping anything, there weren't console-level games on mobile. Even now, there still really aren't a whole lot of console-level games on mobile, not even Raid Shadow Legends. AAA titles don't make the Vita what it is, but they could have, and that would have probably resulted in a bigger success. There's a huge indie community backing the Vita, with a lot of cool, really unique games that you won't find on any other platform. Sadly, a lot of these games are niche, and again, the Vita didn't sell that well. It did sell like 16 million units, which doesn't seem bad, but when you compare it to the 80 million PSPs that sold, well, the Vita doesn't seem so great. But I'm not here to talk about just why the Vita ultimately failed, even if it seems like it so far. This video is at least supposed to be more focused on the console itself and how it holds up nowadays, so let's start with the design. There are two main designs of the Vita, the original model and the Slim. Which you prefer is really subjective. The older model does have an OLED display which has better colors and blacker blacks, but the Slim is lighter, thinner, and has a slightly better battery. The Slim is also likely to age much better over time. It won't happen with every model, but a lot of the older Vitas do have screen burn-in because of the OLED screen, and that's something you shouldn't ever see with the Slim. A big downside worth mentioning for the older OLED model is the proprietary charging port. You have to get a specific cord for it, and that sucks. The newer Slim has micro USB, which is much more convenient. If you have a cord to charge your PS4 controller, it'll charge the PS Vita Slim. The Slim also comes with a gigabyte of storage, whereas the OLED model didn't. This would be a big advantage if you could use the gigabyte when also having a memory card, but you can't. It's the internal storage or the memory card, so that's kind of odd. Speaking of memory cards, that's always been one of the biggest sore spots of the Vita. If you buy this for what a lot of people buy it for, which is indie titles and homebrew games and all that, you're going to need a memory card to have enough storage, and unfortunately they require a proprietary card from Sony that are very expensive and likely are only going to go up in price as they get more scarce. You can get micro SD card adapters adapters like this one, but you do have to hack your console to use this, and so not everyone's going to want to do that. And also, of course, this isn't officially Sony supported, so do it at your own risk. I have the slim PS Vita here, and wow, it's kind of dirty, but it is a really slick machine. It's thin, super light, and comfortable to hold. The joysticks feel good, the buttons give nice tactile feedback. All in all, it's pretty well designed. The screen is 5 inches, which crazily enough is smaller than most smartphones now, but it doesn't feel too small, and had they made it any bigger, it probably wouldn't have been pocketable. This isn't the Nintendo Switch, it's made to be purely portable. You're never hooking it up to your TV or standing it on your desk, it's always in your hands. Of course, the Switch Lite is a thing now, and that console is much more comparable to the PS Vita, although it is also 8 years newer. This is actually pretty similar to the style of the Nintendo Switch though, funnily enough. The Switch kind of just looks like a bigger version of the Vita, and that's not to knock the Switch, which is amazingly powerful considering it is a full-fledged console, condensed down to the form factor of a tablet. But until the Switch came along, the Vita was easily the best portable gaming machine in terms of power. The 3DS couldn't touch it, and it's kind of nuts that it took 6 years for someone to finally beat the Vita. One of what you could call design quirks of the Vita is how some of the controls work. You can't click the joystick, which is often used on console games, and there's only one bumper on each side of the Vita. To remedy this, Sony added in a rear touch panel. Basically, you tap or swipe across the back of the Vita to perform certain actions. Not a ton of games utilize this, but ones ported over from the console like Sly Cooper here need to use it because there are more controls than available on the Vita otherwise. You also often need to use the front touchpad, which I don't find as bad, but I absolutely hate the rear touchpad. It's very inconsistent and can be really uncomfortable to use. Not to mention that accidental touches occur way too easily. I'm not going to go as far to say that the rear touchpad is a bad design element, as it's quite clever, but I really wish that Sony instead had put like a couple buttons back here. I think that would have made a lot more sense. It did kind of fit what the PS4 controller was going for though, with the touchpad on it. Of course, that touchpad was not used for very many games at all, but I'm sure they had that in mind when they were designing the Vita. The UI of the Vita is actually one of the coolest on any console I've ever used. To unlock it, you peel back the lock screen like a piece of paper, then you're greeted with all of your bubbly icons. I love how smooth this all is. The animations are quick, and at least for me, never stutter, making a very pleasant experience moving through the OS. You have a multitasker like you would on a phone, you can have multiple games open, and if you want to quit it, you can just peel it away like you do on the lock screen. I really appreciate how easy it is to get out of a game without quitting it completely. It'll never close a game in the background if you go to the home screen or whatever, and if it does need to close the game to open, say, another game, it'll warn you beforehand. As long as your Vita keeps a charge, which it does for a long time for me on standby mode, your game should remain open. And the Vita's battery is worth talking about. I honestly never played my Vita too much after the first year or two of getting it, and even when I did use it a lot, I never really pushed it too far. I would bring it on road trips and whatnot, but it didn't get exactly a ton of playtime. I bought it back in, I want to say 2014, it might have been 2013, but my earliest pictures are from 2014, and I would say now the battery is basically as good as it was 6 years ago. I'm talking like 4 hours on a single charge of game time, maybe 5. Nothing crazy, but actually pretty similar results to the Nintendo Switch. Take that number with a grain of salt though, because if the console has been used a lot over the years, the battery probably will have degraded, and so it won't be quite as good. Also, the slim model again does get about an extra hour of battery over the OLED, so that's worth noting. The PS Vita unfortunately has a front and back camera, and I say unfortunately because if you're anything like me and got it when you were a bit younger, you probably have a cringy selfie lurking somewhere. Yeah, I have regrets. I could just hear right now 800 Discord users ready to post this picture, and I don't know how that makes me feel. Anyways, regardless, you're not going to produce any good photos. 0.3 megapixels on both the front and back camera, which is terrible, but at least it had a camera, and I know it was utilized in some games such as Uncharted. One of the best things about the Switch is not only is it portable, but you can also hook it up to your TV. This is not something the Vita had. It was a purely portable system, but the PS TV, on the other hand, wasn't. The PS TV was essentially a Vita, but without a screen. It would plug into your TV and allow you to play Vita games with a PS4 controller. In theory, this was cool, but it had a lot of issues. Firstly, Vita games might have looked impressive on the small screen, but on a big TV, not so much. Secondly, not all games were supported on PS TV, and a lot of the big name titles such as Uncharted Golden Abyss or Killzone Mercenary couldn't be played on your PS TV. And those type of games might be some of the reason you would buy a PS TV, so it kind of made things pointless. Mind you, I believe there are probably hacks to get around this and get these games working, but still they should have been supported in the first place, and I know Uncharted again uses your camera at one point. There should have been a workaround for that. It just was kind of lazy on their part. So yeah, an average user who bought a PS TV would probably be disappointed, and they they did discontinue the PS TV pretty quickly after launch. One big selling point of the PS Vita as well as the PS TV was remote play for the PS4. The idea was that you could play your PS4 away from your PS4, in a different room or at a hotel or, somewhere that you had internet. Nowadays, this is easily done on any platform. You can stream your PS4 on your phone, on your PC, on your Mac, but back in the day, this was pretty new and a very cool concept. However, remote play was never that good. There often was some weird control mapping due to the fact that the PS Vita doesn't have all the controls a controller does, and even if you had great internet, the same problems that have always been with streaming were there. Latency, potential frame drops even if your internet is good. As cool as remote play was, it wasn't as big of a selling point as I think Sony hoped it to be. And hey, because of that failure, we now have streaming on like every single platform for the PS4, so that's really cool. There are also quite a few features on the PS Vita that were once available but kind of aren't anymore. Lots of old apps like Facebook just don't exist for the Vita anymore, and YouTube, for example, which I still have downloaded from back in the day, just doesn't open. There are some Sony apps like the Near app that doesn't work anymore either. I think this was a pretty useless app. Basically, it showed you nearby users. I highly doubt anybody used this, and so yeah, it was pretty pointless to begin with, but it isn't here anymore. This wouldn't be a PS Vita video without talking about homebrewing and hacking in general, as that's something that's been very popular for the Vita since day one. It makes sense. The PS Vita is the perfect small retro gaming machine, at least potentially. It's really ideal for emulating old consoles or even the PSP. And good news, every PS Vita and PS TV, as far as I know, is completely hackable nowadays. It's super easy. I did it to this one, which was on an old version, which I think made it a little bit easier, but most Vitas out there are hackable, so that's pretty cool. And hey, now I can play SNES Mario Kart on the go. Emulation on the Vita isn't perfect. Many consoles don't have the best emulators yet, like the Nintendo DS. The Vita hardware-wise is kind of like an underpowered smartphone, so I doubt we'll ever be able to play many like PS2 titles or anything. But PS1 titles I think usually run really well, and so do PSP titles. And retro gaming is of course an easy go-to, and no doubt there are a ton of things you can do with this old Vita once you crack it, including getting up the old PSP UI. This is so you can play PSP games, but still, it's just kind of cool going through the PSP UI, not gonna lie. Speaking of games, let's go back to that for a minute. While there aren't a ton of AAA games out there for the Vita, the indie community is absolutely massive, and for a lot of people, that's the reason to get a Vita. We're talking tons of JRPGs, platformers. You could sink an insane amount of hours into this Vita if those are the types of games you're into. There are still reasons to be playing it in 2020, and a good example of that is Persona 4. A lot of people say the Vita version is the best version of Persona 4. I can't speak to that because I've never played it, but I know a lot of Vita users have, and from what I've heard, it's one of the best, if not the best game for the entire platform. There are some big name games out there, and I appreciate Sony's original ambition to make console-level games for the Vita. Need for Speed Most Wanted? That was pretty much a direct port from the console. Honestly, the graphics are downgraded, but otherwise, it's basically the same game. I hate that Sony gave up on the Vita so quickly, and instead of admitting that it was their fault, they blamed mobile gaming. Again, the Vita didn't fail, Sony failed the Vita. And while by no means is this console useless or bad even now in 2020, it could have been a whole lot better if it had gotten those extra years of support that it should have gotten. This is a powerful little console, and I absolutely love my PS Vita. I'm never gonna get rid of it, and when I started making this video, I actually got kind of re-addicted to playing it, specifically with the remake of Sly 2. I hadn't gotten all the achievements yet, so I set out to do that. This console is amazing because it plays anywhere and it can do so much, especially once you homebrew it. Should you buy one nowadays? Probably not, but I do think there still is a market for it out there. If the indie games appeal to you, or maybe even just Persona 4 appeals to you, or you want a really great little emulation machine if you put the time and effort into it, the Vita is awesome. However, for most people, if you want to buy this, I would say you should look to the Nintendo Switch or the Switch Lite. Yes, this is cheaper, but you can do so much more with the Nintendo Switch and Switch Lite. They have way more games, at least when it comes to bigger name games, so for most people, those are the better choices. The Switch has Nintendo games, which is a big appeal alone, but they also have legitimate console-level titles like Witcher 3 and Skyrim and games like that. The fact that we can play those now portably is amazing. The Vita is great, and while it isn't the greatest portable console anymore, it still is a lot of fun to play, and in the very least, I'm glad Sony developed it, even if they might have regretted it. But with that, I think I'm pretty much done here. Did you ever own a PS Vita? Did you ever want one? Do you still want one? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech if you want to for whatever reason, and you can always join the community Discord too, link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91tech, and I will see you all next time.